We're just so excited. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Taylor, and I'm going to introduce Jason here in just a little bit. Jason, it's been really awesome, and it's kind of funny to be speaking together this morning because we've really only known each other for about 2 months now. But I can say Jason is one of my best friends already. Multiple times through the week, we get together. I don't know how many times we just get a text message just like, hey, what are you doing tonight? Oh, nothing. Well, let's play games. And we get together. We're good friends. Hit it off right off the bat. But for those of you who don't know, Jason is officially now on staff with us along with his wife, Bridget. Bridget is our children's ministry pastor, and Jason is our pastor of outreach and discipleship. And so he's with us this morning. We're going to speak together. Dad left. He said, hey, would you guys be willing to speak? And we kind of talked about this idea of doing a tag team thing together. And so we're going to tag it off here in a little bit. But we were talking together, man, what do we want to speak about? What's on our heart this morning? And in every conversation, like I said, I haven't known Jason long, but the thing that I know about Jason, every conversation you get into with him, you will find this topic of discipleship. Jason is so passionate about discipling people and leading them to Jesus and following along with them. And we're just so excited this morning because it's a passion of his, it's a passion of ours, and it's something as a church that we should be passionate about. And so this morning, would you give it up for Jason as he starts us off and speaks with us this morning?
Hey guys, good morning. As Taylor introduced, I'm Jason. And I thought this morning I would start out by just telling you a little bit about myself, because I know a lot of you already, but I thought for those of you who don't know, I would just give a little background. My story starts in a church a heck of a lot like this one. We had similar green chairs, in fact, and I grew up. I have 3 older brothers. And I remember getting to see them go through youth group before me. And I was so jealous because I got to see them do all the fun events and all the exciting paintball and laser tag. And I was so jealous that I couldn't be out there doing it with them. And so I remember that point when I got to be old enough to actually go to those same events. And I just got so excited because I got to go to a summer camp where I actually, in turn, heard about Jesus. But it took me almost 3 years of going through youth group and going to all the fun events and realizing that I was just doing the motions of church, of really not living it out, but just doing the basic things. And so after 3 years of being in youth group, I was at a summer camp, and a pastor got up, and he talked about Jesus, and he talked about what it meant to be a follower of Jesus. And so I thought about it, and I realized I wasn't living that out in my life, and so I wanted to be a follower of Jesus. And so I gave my life to Christ. And I realized that I had a lot to learn. I wasn't there yet. I had grown up in church, and I had known all the stories and all the background to the different verses, and I could tell you Jesus when I needed to on the Sunday school answers. But I realized there was so much more I had to learn in order to actually be a follower of Jesus. And so luckily for me, I had an amazing youth pastor. So no pressure, Taylor. But I had an amazing youth pastor. His name is Greg. He was a main person in my life who really discipled me, who challenged me to grow, to dig deeper into whatever topic we were talking about, if it was love or friendships in Christ, or if it was being challenged to live a certain way. He would challenge me to ask questions, to dig deeper. He would say, hey, where can you go find more information about this? How can you apply this? What does that look like in your life? And so I was constantly being challenged and being encouraged, and he was actually one of the main proponents of encouragement for me as I decided to go on my first missions trip. I went overseas, and I spent almost 3 months overseas doing missions just in high school. And I realized it was actually through connections I made there that in turn I realized I really wanted to know more. And so I ended up getting a degree in biblical studies just because I wanted to answer those questions. And so I think it's interesting for me. I was a youth pastor, but if I were to ask all of you guys out there this morning, who is that person that was a role model for you when it came to following Jesus? I'm sure somebody comes to mind. I don't know if that's a friend or a family member or even a pastor. It's interesting. There's a lot more to my story, but I think I want to hone in on one aspect of it this morning, and that's really this idea of discipleship, and mainly because discipleship is something that we've all kind of heard about. It's been around in church for a long time, but it's not usually something that we're doing well. And I say that mainly because if we were doing it well, this church would be filled to the rafters with people. And so if we look around and we can realize that this problem that's happening in the American church today, it's so similar. It's the reason the American church is just on the decline is because we've forgotten this idea of what discipleship looks like, this idea that the early church truly embodied, and that is discipleship. Discipleship is following Jesus and taking others along for the journey. And I'm going to say that. It's on the screen. If you get nothing else this morning, just get that. It's the main point. Discipleship is following Jesus and bringing others along for the journey. I think it's interesting. Discipleship is from the Greek, meaning learner or student. I also think it's interesting. The word disciple or discipleship, it shows up 261 times in the Bible. But interestingly enough, only in the New Testament. And so really that can tell us something about what discipleship is. It really tells us that it was pioneered by Jesus. It was started, it was really encouraged by Jesus. And so it's funny, though, if you take a look at Jesus' ministry, at the men that he chose to bring along for the journey, they're not the guys you would typically expect to see. They weren't the religious leaders of the day. They weren't the guys that you would expect to be in their Bibles all the time or their Torah at the time. They really weren't those guys that were well-educated or even wealthy. They weren't particularly well-spoken. But Jesus chose them to carry on the lineage of our church. And it's the reason that today we're all sitting here. They're directly responsible for the faith that we all claim. I think it's interesting and imperative as followers of Jesus to continually be maturing in Christ and in our faith. I think it's important as we decide to follow Jesus that we start seeing distinguishable signs of growth. And it's funny, actually, for me, I think of my son when I think of distinguishable signs of growth. I've been incredibly blessed. Some of you guys have seen him around. He is almost two, and he is a ball of joy. He loves eating snacks on our Sunday night prayer nights. He is just such a blessing to my wife and I. And actually, I should say my wife is a huge blessing to me in this way because she knows a lot about children. And I don't say that to, bolster the children's ministry at all. I'm just being honest with you guys. She knows a lot about children. She got a degree in child development. And really, for me, what that means is I get to know all those things that I wouldn't know otherwise about kids. And I can remember one time in specific, we were sitting in our apartment in Chico, California, and our son was in the middle of our living room. He was on a blanket, on his tummy, doing some tummy time like all infants do. And I remember seeing this moment where he went from his tummy to his back, and he flipped over. And I remember not being that impressed, actually. But thankfully for me, I have a wife who knows a lot about children and about their development. And so I remember my wife telling me what a monumental moment this was in the life of my son. Just that moment from one side to another. When I start thinking about that, when I think about that being a distinguishable sign of growth in my son, I start thinking about it in relation to our walk with Christ. We do a similar action when it comes to Christ. It looks a lot like we're face down, we're in the world, we're doing things our way, and then at some point we roll over. Right? We have that distinguishable sign of growth. And it's interesting because those signs don't stop as we start growing in Christ. With my son, it's been crawling and walking, and now just this last week, he figured out we have a ramp in the front of our house, and he has a little tricycle that can go down it. And so things like that really correlate to our walk with Christ. As a father, I actually, I have to brag for a moment here. I actually got the best award you can get as a dad, and I thought I would bring it, and I'll have Taylor hold it up. It's that right there. Guys, you can take a look. Yeah, best dad ever. It's right there. In the shirt. So I earned it. I got some years to keep earning it, I'm sure. But I just wanted to say, it's funny when we think about parenting, we often think about, the best dad ever moments where we get to see those signs of growth really start happening. But unfortunately, when it comes to our walk with Christ and our walk with other believers or disciples, we start to do this thing where we definitely wouldn't do if it was our own children. And it's this thing where, imagine you have a newborn baby in Christ. So, and we take them and we get them to that point where they're rolling over on their own. And we say, good job, you did it. You're on your way. Now see ya. I'm going to leave you there. And just walk away or drop them off at the nearest mall or something. But we like to do that with new believers. We like to have that moment where we see them say the prayer, or we see them start to go through those motions, but we don't take it any farther. I think that's one of those behaviors that we definitely don't earn that shirt with. And I think it's so important to look at kind of what the Bible tells us about this. It's actually Paul, he talks about in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, he says, brothers and sisters, I could not address you as people who live in the Spirit, but as people who are still worldly, mere infants in Christ. He said, I gave you milk, not solid food, for you are not ready for it yet. I think it's important to realize that we should be seeing signs of distinguishable growth, not only in our own lives, but also the lives of the people that we're reaching out to, that we're discipling. I think it's something that we're called to do by God, and it's really a mandate from God to bring others along the journey with us. I think the point that we're trying to get across again today is discipleship is following Jesus and bringing others along for the journey.
Man, come on. We were talking about this, and the awesome thing is we kind of put this together. I don't know if you wrote it down, but if you didn't, you need to. I love every time we've kind of gone through this message together, and it hits me every time, is that the reason our churches in America and even the European church, you know how many churches close their doors every year, and you hear about it. It's common. I was on the news like 6 months ago, Lindsay and I were watching, and there's this Presbyterian church, really famous, really old, historical building in Spokane, and they had their last church service in there because their numbers are just declining. The same reason we see that decline is also the same reason why the early church was growing, because if you lack discipleship, then others aren't coming along for the journey. And as Jason said, you need to get to that point where you roll over. That's great, but you need to keep growing. You need to keep showing those distinguishable signs of growth, and you need to take others along for the journey. And like you said, the early church fully embodied this. The early church, they understood this, and that's why it was so explosive. And man, can we just sink that in this morning? Discipleship, let's say it together, is following Jesus. Oh, come on, we're going to start it over. Ready? Discipleship is following Jesus and taking others along for the journey. Hear that today, because if you walk out of this room and you do that, man, there is no limit to what Jesus can do in Yakima. There is no limit to what God wants to do in this church, but it takes us living out this principle, not just understanding it. And that's the thing with the early church. They didn't just know this. They didn't just understand it. They did it. And that's where we got to catch on this morning. It's funny. We were preparing this message, and this wasn't something early on in this message that I was going to talk about, but my dad and I, for the last week, have been going to bus school. Bus school. We're training to be, we've been hired from the Yakima School District to be bus drivers. And so we've been going to bus school Monday through Friday this week. We went to bus school, and man, I don't know, it's so crazy. But here's the deal. There's a couple of reasons. Number one is because I'm poor. Bus school pays $18 an hour, and I said, hey, I can get behind that. I think it's fun to drive large vehicles. But not only that, but my dad and I, we've really been challenging ourselves. As pastors, it is our job. Our pastoral job, biblically, is to equip the saints for the work of ministry. It's our job to equip you. But that is our second calling. That does not override our first calling from Jesus. That is that we are to make disciples and bring others along for the journey. And so we've been challenged because, we spend so much time in church and we hang out here, and that's great. But it really quickly, all we hang out with are either the people that you bring, which is fantastic, but that's your effort, not my effort, that you bring into this room. Or we just hang out with people that are already saved, that already know the message, because so much of our job is in this building, teaching and preparing. And we've just been really convicted lately. We have a call, even as individuals, that we need to be doing this, and we need to be in relationship, be in proximity to lost people. So we thought, man, what great opportunity every morning to drive a school bus with 85 plus students. What an opportunity in Yakima to just be right in there, engaging with people that need to know Jesus and need a positive influence, right? And so it's really funny just to share a couple things this morning. We've been going to bus school, and the first 2 days, I forgot how much I just hated school. It's homework, it's learning, it's studying. And if it's interesting, I love it, but I'm like the hands-on. I'm just ready to get behind the wheel of the bus and start driving the thing, right? And yeah, watch out, Yakima. And so the first couple days was a binder thick of this thing called liability. And I began to figure out real soon, this is not just driving a bus, right? And we told her, we drive students all the time. She's like, yeah, but that's a 15-passenger van. She's like, you have 85 plus students on this thing sometimes, and you are responsible for the safety of every single one of these children on this bus. And our main boss told the trainer, she said, don't scare these guys away with the liability. A lot of times we scare them and they run off. Like, tell them it's going to be okay. We're going to train you. We're going to teach you well. But man, there were like videos, those awkward 90s videos that you take as training instructional courses. We watched some of those about the rules and regulations and actual lawsuits of bus drivers that had failure to follow the safety standards. And as a result, passengers died as a result of it. And they were responsible for the lives of those passengers because they were the ones that failed to comply to the safety standard. It's a huge responsibility. And with that, taking that in, it poses this question: is this really important who I'm learning from? It's really important who I'm learning from. My dad is a great driver. If you ask the right person, he's a great driver. But I don't want to learn driving bus from my dad because he hasn't driven bus before. Yeah, I want to learn how to drive bus from someone who knows what they're doing. Our instructor, we love her so much. She has been driving bus for the Yakima School District for 20 years. That's a lot of experience. That's a lot of not just knowing these things, but living them out and doing them on the road, right? That's the person we want to be learning from. But the second thing is, what I do want to learn from my dad is I love that my dad and I are doing this together. It's a lot more fun because I need help paying attention in class. It's a lot more fun to do it with someone. And as he's learning stuff, the nice thing, my dad's been like one step ahead in the process. And so he went to go get his permit test and failed it before I did. I also failed it a couple times. There are 4 tests you have to pass to be a school bus driver. And if you've ever taken a bus at a test at the DOL, I was so frustrated. I was like, I'm arguing with the screen. That is not what the book told me. But my dad went ahead and he did some of those steps first. And so as he's doing these steps, he's telling me, hey, you should be prepared for this because this is what I encountered. And we're doing it together. As we're learning, we're doing it together. And we have homework assignments we're bringing home, and we're sharing that together, right? But what I think about this is this responsibility, man. I want to learn from someone who knows what they're talking about, who knows what they're doing. But the crazy thing is when we talk about discipleship this morning, it is an even greater responsibility. You know that your calling as a follower of Jesus, you hold the responsibility that if you don't live this principle out, you are responsible for someone else's eternal destiny. You carry the message of Jesus. These are real people, not only passengers on a school bus, but these are real people that you see at your work, that you see, when you go to the grocery store, that if you don't live out this people, they could suffer the consequences of an eternal destiny. That's a weight we have to hold. And so it's important, who are you being discipled by? Right? Who are you learning from? Who is investing in you and challenging you to be the best follower of Jesus that you can be? Because there's an eternal impact to be made. And who are you bringing along for the journey? Who are you doing it with? As you learn things, are you passing that knowledge on? Right? Discipleship, it's following Jesus and taking others along for the journey. It's the last thing that Jesus asked us to do. I don't know if you've experienced, my grandparents have all passed away now. And there's that deathbed experience, those last words that they get across to you. One of the last things my grandpa told me that just sticks with me is he said, Taylor, he says, I'm really proud of you. It's simple words, right? But those are the last words he chose to speak to me. The last words Jesus gave us before he left this earth is that you should go into the world and make disciples. And it's not a great suggestion, it's a great commandment. He commanded it of us, right? Is that following Jesus, that's what discipleship is. But it's not only following him individually, it's taking others along for the journey. If you'd open your Bible this morning, I want to go to Luke chapter 6, 46 through 49. Luke chapter 6 through 49. So you think about discipleship and this principle. This is not something new to you guys this morning. Most of you here, you've heard this, you've understood this. But it's not just understanding it, it's doing it. And doing it is a lot different than just hearing it and understanding it and writing down on your piece of paper. Right? You have to physically leave this building this morning and go out and do this. I'm just really convicted when I read Luke chapter 6. It says this. So why do you keep calling me Lord, Lord, when you don't do what I say? It says, I'll show you what it looks like when someone comes to me. They listen to my teaching, and then they follow it. It's like a person who builds a house. They dig deep, and they lay the foundation on solid rock. When the floodwaters rise and break against the house, it stands firm. Why? Because it's well built. Right? How many of you have a well-built house? Right? When we were in LA, where my parents are right now, they drove us these probably billion-dollar homes up on this hill. And you can literally see the foundation sinking away from the house because they're built on this hill where when the floodwaters and the rain comes down, which is not very often in Southern California, right? But the erosion of the earth is falling underneath their house, and you can literally see the cracks in the foundation. He's built on a solid rock, on a solid foundation. And he says this, but anyone who hears and does not obey is like a person who builds a house right on the ground without a foundation. When the floods sweep down against the house, it will collapse into a heap of ruins. I love, one of my favorite authors is Francis Chan. And Francis Chan says this thing all the time about his daughter. And I think, Jason, you got a better understanding of this because you're a father already. But he said, if I was to go to my daughter and I asked my daughter to clean her room, how many parents, right, you've done this before? You go and clean your room. He says, if I asked my daughter to go clean her room, what would my response be if she came back to me? She said, hey, Dad, I heard what you said. You told me to go and clean my room. And I got a whole bunch of friends together, and we're putting a little study group, and we're going to study about what it would look like if I was to go and to clean my room. Right? That's not going to fly. Like, just go and clean your room. Go and do what I asked you to do. But why is it that we do the same thing with our faith so many times? Jesus, he's asked us to do something. We say, Jesus, I'm just going to come to church every Sunday, and we're going to talk about it. And I'm going to have someone pray with me about it. Right? And I'm just going to leave it at that. It's not going to fly because we're accountable. Why do you keep calling me Lord when you don't do what I say? Right? And so what we need to not do is hide behind the excuse that we don't know anybody who needs to know Jesus. That's a lame excuse this morning. We can't hide, and I'm telling you this morning that this is something that's convicting me as well. This is why I'm getting out into the community and driving bus, because I've realized that I've been in this church for so long that all my friendships, all my close relationships are with people that already know Jesus. But I have this commandment, right, from God that I am responsible, I'm accountable to live out. When I die, Jesus is going to hold me accountable to the way I lived out this principle. And so I'm putting myself into areas and environments where I can be around lost people, because it's why Jesus came, to seek and to save the lost. And so like Roy talked about last week, it's not that your salvation is necessarily built upon that. Your salvation is in Jesus. But once you come to salvation in Jesus, you have a responsibility to live out the things that you know, to live out the teachings that he's given you. And so I want to read one more example of this morning. Jesus has got to be our prime example. And if you turn with me again, Luke chapter 19, so you're just flipping up a couple pages. Luke chapter 19, verse 1 through 10. This is a story you've heard before. It's the story of a man called Zacchaeus. And when I read it this week, man, it just took on a different concept. It took on a different weight. In verse 19, chapter 19, verse 1, it says, Jesus entered Jericho and made his way through the town. There was a man named Zacchaeus, and he was the chief tax collector in the region and had become very rich. Now, I know most of us in this room, we understand the background of this, but if you don't, just hang on to this. He's a tax collector. Tax collectors are not favored people even in the society we live in today, right? You're not, man, who can I be friends with on Facebook? Let me find an IRS agent. Yep, first choice. Like, I want you to see how I'm spending my money. Where, you're not going to do that, right? He typically wasn't favored. And beyond that, tax collectors, they weren't favored because they cheated people out of their money. They took extra and kept it for themselves. And so, and he was the chief tax collector. Said he tried to get a look at Jesus in verse 3, but he was too short to see over the crowd. Anyone have vertical challenge problems? So he ran ahead and he climbed a sycamore fig tree beside the road, for Jesus was going to pass that way. When Jesus came, he looked up at Zacchaeus and he called him down. Zacchaeus, he said, quick, come down. This part, man, I want you to catch. I must be a guest in your home today. Zacchaeus quickly climbed down and he took Jesus to his house with great excitement and joy. But people were displeased because he has gone to the home to be the guest of a notorious sinner, and they grumbled. Meanwhile, Zacchaeus, he stood before the Lord and he said, I will give half of my wealth to the poor. Lord, if I've cheated anyone on their taxes, I'll give it back to them 4 times as much. Jesus responded, salvation has come to this home today, for this man has shown himself to be a true son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save those who are lost. To seek and to save those who are lost. This is the crazy thing. Right? I said, don't hide behind excuses. You don't know lost people. I want to give you this point, is that you need to invite yourself into relationship with lost people. Invite yourself into relationship with lost people, because it's what Jesus did for us. And the thing that I found funny when I read this story, I don't know how many times I've invited someone to church. Have you guys invited someone to church before? Right? I'd say 9 times out of 10, they don't show up, right? Unless you bribe them really well, right? Jesus didn't say, hey, Zacchaeus, you should come to my message I'm preaching on Sunday. Or hey, Zacchaeus, we're doing a barbecue at my place. It starts at 7 o'clock. If you can get your own ride there, we'll see you there. This is Jesus invited himself into Zacchaeus' home. Zacchaeus, I must be a guest at your house. Let's go. I hope it's ready. I hope it's clean because we're going, right? And so Jesus enters himself. He throws himself into this relationship with Zacchaeus. You need to invite yourself into relationship with lost people because it's what Jesus did for us. We're disciples, and so therefore we go and we make disciples. So there's two questions you have to ask yourself this morning is am I a disciple of Jesus? Are there signs of growth? Am I continually growing with Jesus? And then if that's the case, if you are a disciple of Jesus, are you taking others along for the journey? And I would say if you're not doing that second part, then you need to be convicted. You need to be challenged this morning. And I am myself. If you're not taking others along for the journey, then you might need to question if you really are a follower of Jesus. Because Jesus said, if you are my disciples, you will obey my commandments. This is a commandment that Jesus gave to us. And so we can't hide behind the excuse, well, I'm not a good people person, or, I don't. I think a lot of times we think, man, we got to have a common interest with somebody. My neighbor, all they talk about is football. That's me. I don't know anything about football. I'm like, they drink beer. I don't drink beer. I have a good excuse now not to because I have diabetes. People just pressure you. They're like, yeah, you got to drink. And I'm like, no, I don't drink. And they're like, oh, come on. But if you say, I can't because I have diabetes, they go, oh, I'm so sorry for you. Man, that must suck. And I'm like, yeah, it does. But, right, you don't have to have a commonality with people. Just go out and throw yourself into relationship with them. Why? Because they're lost and they need you. And you hold the key to an eternal destiny that if you don't live out this principle, you hold the weight. You are responsible for the message that you carry. And so it's important that we follow the commandment, we get that message out, that we bring others along for the journey. So in response today, Jason and I, we thought it would be fun to interview each other and maybe just ask a couple common questions when it comes to discipleship. And what we hope is that this morning, through these questions, through these responses, that maybe we can just give some insight. How do you take this home and how do you do this? And so the first question starting out is, I don't think any of us in this room this morning, whether you're convicted or not, I don't think the reason you're not taking others along for the journey is because you're like, yeah, I just don't like that commandment, right? Like, no thanks, Jesus. I'll do something else. I don't think any of us are deliberately disobeying Jesus. I think that maybe just for some of us, we just don't know where to start. We're like, what do I do? How do I disciple? I'm not a pastor, Taylor. How do I, like I said, this isn't a job of a pastor. This is the job of a follower of Jesus. And so it's something I'm challenging myself with, that I can't just be teaching the lost people that you bring into this room, right? Like, I need to be doing my part out there. And I have neighbors, and I have relationships I'm going to have with kids on a school bus, right? I hold a responsibility to this. And so, but I think maybe for us, a big hurdle to jump over is that maybe we just don't know those practical steps. How do we start? And so, Jason, what would you say maybe are some starting steps to, number one, being discipled, like having someone disciple you, and then some steps of how do I disciple someone else? How do I take that and pass it on?
Yeah, I think the question really is important to look at because I think when it comes to discipleship, it really is about asking questions. It really comes down to you need to, as a disciple, start to ask questions. If you have never been challenged in church or by somebody, it's probably because you're not asking questions to grow deeper. And I think it's the same is true when it comes to discipling somebody else. I think the best thing we can do for somebody is ask them questions about what they believe and where they got that and how they came about thinking that way. I have an example of my wife knows a girl who she came to Christ on her own, basically, by my wife asking her question after question of like, what do you believe? And doing life alongside that, but really just getting down to the heart of, well, why do you believe that? Like, what spurred you to believe that? Because the truths that Jesus laid out, and really that the Bible lays out for us, it has all the answers. We are blessed to have a God who knew that we would have questions, and we're blessed to have a God that gave us the answers to those. And so as far as we want to go, we can ask questions and start there.
That's good. And we talked about yesterday, when people ask you this question, sometimes you don't know the answers to them. And so it challenges you to go and find those answers, and you do it together. And so So really, when you choose to bring someone along with you, you don't have to know the answers. But when you're asked questions you don't know the answer to, that is a key opportune moment for you to show some signs of growth, for you to grow and be challenged by those questions that you're going to learn together. Yeah. And so, super important.
Yeah. I think one of the questions we have to ask, though, when it comes to discipleship, I think, Taylor, what would good signs of discipleship look like, and what would be some bad signs that discipleship may be going a little wrong? What do you think?
Okay, so a good example of discipleship, I think, really comes down to who are you being discipled by? Number one, Jesus, he's the prime example, is the word. But who are you learning from is a really big question. And if you're not learning from anybody, you need to find someone to learn from. You need to find someone that's further along to challenge you. I'd say one of the really important things is you need to find someone who's gone before you. Like I said in my bus driver thing, I love my dad, but I don't want to learn how to, with all those liabilities at stake, I don't want to learn bus from my dad. Like, I want to learn it from someone with the 20 years plus experience, right? And so you need to be looking for that person that has that experience. For me personally, like I said, this is not something we're just challenging you like, hey, peasants, you need to go do this. Like, no, we're with you. Like, we are all sinners. We're all in need of Jesus and salvation, right? And so Jason and I, we're doing this. And one person that I am always challenged by is our great man, Roy Brewer, last weekend. Every time Roy comes into town, I make it a point. I need to have lunch with him, and I need to hear about these stories. I need to hear, because he's someone that not only have I seen knows these things, but he lives them out. Not only does he know information or point to the answers in the Bible, but he has stories, he has experience. He comes back with these stories of the power of God moving in these countries that he's gone to. Like, that's the person I want to be learning from, someone who's gone before me. And so I'd say you can learn from anybody, even people that maybe don't necessarily have the right answers all the time. Maybe that challenges you to go out and find the right ones. But I think it's really important that you challenge, who am I following, right? Are they living out what they're talking about, or do they just talk about it? And find someone, especially for us younger people, find someone who's gone before. Roy, I don't want to be in trouble in saying this on the microphone, I think he's in his 70s, right? I mean, I'm 22 years old. He's gone a pretty long ways before me. He's not 30 years old. Like, I'm being mentored. I'm asking questions of someone that has been in this for a long time. And then a bad example of discipleship would be really careful. You're not following the wrong person. Find someone that is living this out. And you need to challenge the Bible with this person, right? If they are speaking things that are not of the Bible, which is really hard, I'd say, when you're a new Christian. So it's really important that you find someone that lives this out. But you need to find someone that walks the talk, right? And so be careful. I guess the last thing is, I've seen some poor ways is that, not that it's always bad, but if someone's pressuring you, like, hey, I need to be discipling you. Like, you need to be at my house, and I'm going to teach you everything that I know about the Bible. You just need to be careful of that person. If you don't trust that person, don't follow them, right? Like, discipleship should be something you are looking to a mentor, and you're finding that person. Like, man, Roy Brewer, that's the person I want discipling me. I chose that, right? Don't let just anybody come up to you be like, hey, I've got all the answers. And if they're claiming that, they're probably not a good person to be discipled by. Same question for you, Jason. I mean, what would you say are some good examples of discipleship, and maybe some not so good examples of discipleship?
Yeah, I think when I think about the word discipleship and what that looks like, I actually think of two friends of mine. I think of two guys that I love dearly. They're both amazing, awesome guys. But when they first met, they decided, one decided for the other that they were going to be in this sort of discipling relationship. And so the older friend decided he was going to go through the whole Old Testament. He was going to start there, and he was going to work through the Bible, and they were going to read it together. And this new Christian, his name's John, John was just not ready for it. And he was so overwhelmed. He had so many questions. He came to me through this college ministry Bridget and I were a part of. He came to me and he asked questions. And he really started with some really complex ideas that were like, whoa, dude, like you've got way deeper than most people ever get because our other friend was really, he loved theology, he loved going deep into scriptures and seeing the customs and the background, but he didn't always have the wisdom of saying, like, no, you need to start with the milk, like Paul talks about. You need to start there and then go towards the meat, when it comes to our walk with God. And so one of the cool things is that my friend John, he may be here in a couple weeks. He's an amazing guy. It's so funny because John is a quiet guy. If he comes, like if you guys start introducing yourself, he'll probably shake your hand and say hi, but that's about it. But he is an amazing guy. I love him to death. He really was not ready for that level of growth at that point. And so I would say at that point, it was the wrong way of doing discipleship because I think you have to meet somebody where they're at. I think that we can't expect non-Christians to start following Jesus' commands before they understand what Jesus did for them. I think it's amazing to me when I think of my friend John. He's this quiet guy. He's picky about food. He's like so not the guy you would expect to have just gone on a missions trip overseas in Asia this last summer. In fact, he just got back. But just getting to hear the excitement that is his trip to Asia and getting to see the impact that he got to have there because of those times when we asked questions and when he got to really dive deeper into his walk with Christ at his own pace. It's amazing to see the transformation that God can do through discipleship, through growing together. And I will say John has been one of those guys that has constantly been an encourager to me, even as we've continued this relationship of hey man, how's it going? On the phone we'll talk and have those conversations. But really, he asked the same questions of me that I'm trying to say, well, no, John, like, you should be praying more, or you should be reading your Bible more. And he's like, well, so should you, right? Like, that's, and so we get into this, like, yeah, I should. Let's memorize this first. Let's do this together. And that way we both get to benefit from that relationship, and we both grow in our relationship with Christ. So, yeah.
That's good. I think a really common question I get all the time is, what role does the church play in discipleship? Like, if I come here every Sunday, aren't I being discipled if I go to church?
I think that's a common misnomer there that happens when it comes to church. I think there's churches all across the country, all across the world that would like to tell you this right here is discipleship, and it's not. The fact is, Jesus laid the foundation of what discipleship should look like. He had 12 guys that followed him around, and yet he preached to thousands. The fact is, discipleship doesn't happen in this setting. And it shouldn't. It's not meant to, because as much as Taylor and I and Jerry and Bridget were pastors to all of you in some way, it's really not about seeing us in that light. We're here to equip you to go and do that work. But really, you're called to be in discipleship with others. And so it should be happening outside of the church. That should be something we carry from here outward. I think the role that the church plays in discipleship should be very, very little. Really just the equipping role of giving you the tools you need in order to go out and disciple others. I think the individuals in the church have all of that responsibility when it comes to discipleship. We really have every expectation from Christ that we are going to go from here and go out in the world and disciple those that need it.
Yeah, I think, I don't know about you, but when I read my Bible, discipleship often revolves around food
Yeah.
and eating. And so we're going to set you up for that really well this morning because you're going to leave, and I can guarantee that most of you are going to go and have lunch, whether at your house or at a restaurant, right? Man, who do you need to be bringing along for that journey? Sit them down at the table with you. Jason and Bridget, I love because they're just relational people. They're like, man, let's play games all the time. I'm like, I'm too tired. And they're like, no, like let's play games till midnight.
Right.
And I'm like, you're driving
come.
to Seattle in the morning, and you shouldn't be up till midnight. And he's like, no, we can do it. And then they leave at like 3 in the morning. Yeah. I'm like, man, you're gonna get like 3 hours of sleep, man.
That's all right.
Right? Like discipleship, it's relational. It doesn't happen in this large setting. This is a great setting. This is tools that you should be taking. But if you just come to church every Sunday and then you're not in relationship with lost people, and you're not in close relationship with someone that's challenging you in your faith, then you're probably not being discipled. And so it's really important that if you're identifying that this morning, I don't think I'm being discipled, or, I don't think I'm really bringing someone along for the journey. Right? This was a commandment of Jesus, and it's what he did for you. He inserted himself into relationship with us, and in that story of Zacchaeus, and so we need to be doing this with others. And so 2 questions before you leave this room today. And I'm just going to ask you to close your eyes because I think it's just going to help us focus this morning on a personal level for you. I want you to answer this question. Am I being discipled? Do I have someone, or maybe it's multiple someones, that are people that have gone before you that challenge you? If you're not challenged in your faith, then you're probably not growing. There should be signs of growth to your faith till the day you die. And so can you identify that person this morning? And if you can, I just want to challenge you this morning. When you leave this room, if you call yourself a follower of Jesus, then you have an obligation to go out and find someone that you can be challenged by, that you can grow in your faith with. It's a command of Jesus. And so can you identify that person? And if not, you need to figure that out. And second question is this. Who are you bringing along for the journey? Who are you taking with you? If the answer is, no one, or if the answer is, I don't really know lost people, then what can you do to insert yourself into a relationship with lost people? Maybe that's sparking a conversation with your neighbor, making a plate of cookies and bringing it across the street. Maybe that's, talking to someone at Walmart, whatever it is. Lost people. We're not talking about saved people. Jesus came to seek and save the lost. Who are you bringing along with you that needs the wisdom and the knowledge that you have? Are you taking them along with you? And just, with your eyes closed, just the last thing Jason really challenged me with this is, man, how many people should I be discipling? Should I be taking 12 people along with me? Probably not, because Jesus was Jesus, and he's our example, and he had 12 people. So taking on 12 people is probably too many people. But there should be someone that you're taking along with you. And if you can't identify that person this morning, I want to challenge you in faith to go and find that someone that you can take along with you. And we just want to pray over you this morning. But let's leave this room and let's do this because we're followers of Jesus, and it's what he's asked us to do. Jesus, we thank you this morning for bringing us into this place. God, for in some ways challenging myself included this morning, this concept of discipleship. Am I a follower of you? And if I am I bringing others along for the journey? Because it's what you asked me to do. God, help me just to walk this principle out in obedience.
God, just help us get the answers to the questions that we're seeking from you. God, teach us the questions that we should be asking of you as well. God, bring those people that need to hear your word to us and bring us to them so that we can further your kingdom. God, let these words not just be something that we hear this morning, but something that we can really apply and go from here and use. God, we thank you for this morning. We thank you for the message that we've heard. But let us be able to apply it throughout our entirety of our lives. Let us fully embody what it means to be a disciple. Amen.